Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our weekly market overview. We're just going to be covering just an overview of how the market's doing and what we can expect out of it. Just a quick disclaimer, anything you see in this video is not financial advice. It's just a market overview for educational purposes. Alright, and let us get started. So first and foremost, what we always like to look at is our weekly candle here. So our weekly candle here, we did create a slight new high on with our SPY candle. It's showing signs of a slight hammer candle, but I'll get into it a little bit more once we go down to lower time frames. But nothing too much to say out of here. We did close above the previous 2 weeks price action, so just positive momentum over 603 was really good. That's what we were looking at last week. So nothing too much to say as far as placement is, but what we do have playing out here is we are creating higher lows, which is good on any pullback. This is our beginning of our structure. We have a higher low, higher low, higher low. So as far as a weekly trend perspective is, we are still positive. Now let's go ahead and go down and pull up the lines here, the thousands of lines that I have, which I will give you guys all of our expected ranges and supports and resistances at the end of the live. But first and foremost, what I wanted to just mention is last week we were looking at this channel here building out on a breakout and pullback to see if we would have a retest of this previous sloping resistance. While that was happening, we created a new sloping resistance. So we were just waiting to see if we have any price action that can start to close above this sloping resistance. And as you see this week, we actually ended up closing out of it. So that's a good indicator of bullish momentum. On top of that, we now have a green channel here building out on the weekly as well. Before it was just minor touches, but having this week actually be supportive off this sloping support here, it just gives us a little bit more confluence that we're creating a buying channel building up here. So buyers are attempting to step up. One thing that we mentioned last week was our weekly expected high was around 610.80, so we actually ended up getting that plus about 20 cents. So yay to us for seeing that. This week's expected range is a little bit higher. I'm not 100% confident to say that we're gonna create this new high. But one thing worth mentioning is for our open interests and out of the money contracts, 610, 615, 620, those areas on SPY are still seeing noticeable volume as far as the strike price goes for out of the money. So it is worth noting that there are people stepping in with fairly decent volume. I know this 615, if I'm not mistaken, is around like 7 or 8,000 open interest. It doesn't necessarily indicate volume, but it does indicate a good amount of people that are interested in price action above our current level. So just worth mentioning. And if we go to our daily here, here's something I noticed on our daily. So with our daily here, there wasn't too much of a price range that happened on Friday. It's kind of pretty much a dollar range, just kind of chopping around in between here. With our breakout here creating new highs, one thing that I notice is obviously expected somewhat of a slight resistance or rejection towards our previous highs here. Expected to see price get there, have a little bit of a pullback, somewhat healthy, and push forward. If you can please mute your mic there, Scotty, I'm gonna go ahead and mute you. Um, so we expected, when we get to the previous highs, we expected a slight bit of resistance there, right? It was an area of struggle previous. Um, so when we get there, we can expect either, some pullback or a test of it, and have a little bit of a pullback before pushing straight through. But on Friday, we actually just broke out of our previous all-time highs, and with little confidence. So as far as the bull trend, yeah, it's bullish, but that's one thing that's having me a little worrisome. But going through our larger time frames, our weekly, and going down into our hourly and 4 hour, it doesn't necessarily lead to bearish or a bull trap, but it is worth noting that when we got to we usually you expect a breakout of the highs to be a nice breakout of the highs. We basically just barely managed, if we go into the 1 hour here, we barely managed to clip a new high before struggling at that area and then ending the week. So that's something to that's worth noting here, especially if we're gonna have any pullback, which I anticipate having this week. More of a pullback that would be more healthy to continue the trend, um, as opposed to us just breaking through. I mean, we could just break through, but I just um, on follow throughs like that, there tends to be just equally as hard of a drop. So it's always good to have a price action that moves upwards vertically. You want to have some momentums up, some swings lows, and then continue forward, just like we see here, right? We had a pullback here and then break out of that range and push upwards. If we open this week and we start pushing through straight through, on Monday our markets were closed, but the futures were still open. And our price action, I think I have it on here on the 30-minute here. Yeah. Price action on Monday for ES was roughly around here. So it's similar to what happened on Friday, just kind of like chopping around. There wasn't much of a break up below or above. I'm not too sure what the current price action is at the moment. Last I checked, it was a little choppy, but it could have just exploded or died. I'm not too sure, but it really determines whether our cash actually follows that trend, right? So ES is going to be moving 24 hours, but our futures, but our cash can easily turn that around once market opens. So let's go back to our 1 hour here. This is something I wanted to mention. Was last week we had mentioned that week after week we're having this 2 weeks in a row we have this push up, and one we have a gap down, push up, and then slightly break of that upwards channel, and we did it again last week. But what I noted last week was, if our 50% here of that weekly range, we noted last week that 50% was right near this purple line here. It's a little higher, near this pink line here. And I mentioned last week, if we do have any break below this, I would be more confident and to say that price is starting to break the weekly trend, and we have a possibility of testing the 590s, the lows of our range here. And I also mentioned that we have this we'll have like a sloping resistance here that we need to break out of to test for new highs here on any pullback here. So when we had the gap down on CPI here, it actually stopped right at the 50% of our entire weekly move last week. And then from then on, Wednesday to Friday, we had this nice push up towards the highs, with this small box here being our area of significance, right? We wanted to see the 603, 605 area have some confidence. We chopped around in there a little bit, created some value, and then once we had enough value out of that range and we took out our 605, we had positive momentum on the upside. Um, yes, yes. Yep, not a problem. Yeah, and I definitely welcome all the questions. Most definitely, especially before we hop into QQQ. If you have any questions regarding Spy, that would be the best time before we move on and spread into another topic. Um, but yeah, it's worth understanding what the concept is, because if you just hear what I explain, it's not necessarily as easy to just kind of visualize it. Because I have my notes here. This is our pathing for last week with our purple line here. And if you notice, we kind of have that happening right here. This is the same thing we mentioned last week on the live. Just mentioning that we had a pullback here, and we wanted to see if this pullback would just be more of a, a slight pullback to our 50%, which is our purple line here, controlled selling before a breakout. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. The only difference in our projections of last week was essentially this smaller box here, because we had the gap down for CPI. So if we remove Wednesday's price action, this is essentially what we were looking at. But of course, news creates that unpredictable market movement. While we had the push down, we ended up still getting back into range. So it wasn't too much of an issue as far as our weekly pathing, but it is worth mentioning, if the our news does have a huge effect on how we anticipate the market movements can be, right? So despite us having this confidence of a break above here and having this push up here, we had the CPI gap down before we actually had that move up, as you see here. And out of the break of our purple line here, we have our purple pullback trend here. And once we started to break out of our area of significance, our little chop zone here, um, we had a retest of it and pushed towards the highs here after reclaiming the 608, 607 level I mentioned last week. If we can start having some a test of the 607 and then break through it with confidence, we can assume that we'll be testing the highs. And that's exactly what happened as well towards the end of the week. Is we had a retest of our 607, slight pullback to 605, while still holding 605, and then we had that retest of our new highs and actually breaking out slightly to new highs, um, creating this strong buying channel here that I drew out here. We did break out of it. The reason that I drew this buying channel, right? Normally I don't go through all of the channels that I draw out. The reason that I drew it here and I'm mentioning it is I copied these blue lines that we had in the previous weeks and I pasted the same exact line here just to give you guys an idea of what like how the trend has changed, right? We left from just recoveries of the gap downs, right, to now a week where we have an actual trend building out, right, where our lows of the week and our highs of the week are no longer in this lower sloping trend. We actually are building a stronger buying channel. The only thing in question here is now that we're at the tip top, we didn't break out with any major confidence. So a pullback here in our retest of our 607, 608 level, or even 605 would be healthy for another breakout. And if you notice, if we have a few days here, right? Say it doesn't happen Monday, right? We have a pullback, it just breaks up, it just chops around. By Tuesday, if we do want to start to test this lower end, it would be similar to last week where we had this huge break above and a buying channel, right? So the baby blue line would be right here, similar to last week and the week prior. If we had any chop down, we can expect by Tuesday or Wednesday, whether if it breaks underneath there, we can assume that we're gonna have a push towards our 599 test, or do we bounce and hold and go upwards here? So I left the line there, even though it didn't correspond with the price action, just to kind of give myself an indicator of if we're gonna have similar price action as last week, right? Because we have a whole day technically missing. Our Wednesday was just CPI gap down and we filled that range on the same day. So the entire day's price action was just refilling the gap down. So it's worth mentioning that we could potentially still have this be playing out. It's the reason that I left it here, but I did want to compare the difference in the channels here, how we had a slower building of price as opposed to strong buyers stepping in. Let's see, and let's see what else I have in my notes here. Oh yes, so like I mentioned, a pullback and retest of 605 would be very healthy in this in our price action, right? So 605 area right here, we had a consolidation. It was previously a struggle to break out of before we had the gap down, and we kind of been hovering in the center point of this range here, 605. So to break out of 605 and retest, it doesn't necessarily have to be 605. It could be 605.75. I have a support here. It could be 606. Just testing the lower end, the upper end of our range here, and I guess and now creating a lower end of our range for a push higher would be very healthy. So I would look to see if we do have any pullback, if it breaks under 605, how price action is going to react to that, and as well as our strong pivotal point and our weak pivotal point. Give these levels out every week, and they're basically an indicator whether the week's trend indicates bullish or bearish, right? So that doesn't mean just short straight off the bat, but we want to see if price breaks underneath our pivotal point, because if it holds over it, then we're remaining bullish, right? And if it starts to break under the weak point, then we can start to assume that it's becoming bearish, right? So this is not necessarily a pivot point for our scalping in intraday, but as far as what are we closing under on Friday, or what are we closing over on Friday, gives you a kind of a stronger indicator of how buyers and sellers are feeling for their week coming, right? And that's what we go over in these lives. As far as pathing goes, I kind of mentioned one here. I'll draw it out again. It's not too much of a pathing here, because the thing is we're at highs here. So me giving any levels here to say, hey, we're going to 612, 614, 613, 623, whatever, right? That's impossible for me to know. We're at the top, tippy top. So all we can do is take a look at our supports and see if there is going to be any bounces in between, or there are going to be any chop to develop an area of significance, right? An area of value. Chops are very influential in price action, right? Like a chop up here, if we do break above and any pullback, it would be safe to assume that price would slow down right here. There's a chop zone here. So chops are very indicative of areas of support, right? Or resistance, depending on how the price action is going to be. So as far as pathing goes, can't give you too much on where I expect it to move, but I will definitely tell you what to look out for. So first and foremost, We could either open up here and just have a blue sky breakout. That's very, very possible. Um, but what I like I said, what I like in price action would be a retest around a deeper pullback to 608 area, having slight of a bounce here, retesting our sloping here, a sloping line here, maybe break below a little bit for having a little chop around this area and then break out. Essentially, what that's going to create is an inverted head and shoulders. That's what I'm looking out for this week to see if we have a little bit of a pullback to create that inverted head and shoulders for positive momentum. That's one of the major things I'm looking at because we're at the top, so we really can't say. All we can really look at is price failing at any point. Once you're at the top, it could go up forever, right? Price, price, the stock can just go up forever, but how far can it go down is what we as traders are going to be looking for, right? To see where these supports are going to do. How is the price going to react there? Do buyers step in at that point, or do sellers feel more confident and push it further down? So as far as bearish pathing, right? Say we just break down under our supports here and we have a straight clean breakout here. I would look to see once we break out of this our channel here. Well, you don't necessarily have to look at the channel, but I would definitely look to see 605, 675, this area. If it leads to a bounce, then look for us to hold in this range and push upwards, right? That doesn't necessarily look bearish, right? But that is a possibility. What we could look for is stronger sellers breaking it down and nice pop around our 605 level, giving us that confidence that we're going back to set 607 before actually doing that rug pull all the way down. And I would probably say until we break underneath 603, you can't really expect much more of stronger price action unless there is news based events, right? So I would be just looking at our supports here, see how price reacts around it. But a break of 603 would definitely lead to some stronger downside. But we're not there yet. We're quite a few dollars away. So I would just be looking at our supports, which I will give to you at the end of the live. I'll post all those levels for you so that way you can kind of reference them in your charts as you go day after day. Okay, and let's move on to QQQ. Weekly, let's look at the weekly. So the weekly, similar to SPY, hammer candle, but we do have a much longer body, indicating more strength. So this week, actually, looking at our SPY sectors, the XLK, our tech sector, was actually leading this week, right? And that's very clear based on our weekly candle of our QQQ. It's a much stronger buying pressure happening here. These pullbacks was just the CPI gap down, and we've just shot up since. So nothing too much to say on the weekly. I do have, let's see, I have our channels that we drew out a little while ago here. Right here. Okay. So our channels here that we drew out, right? So we were looking to see last week if we have any price action under 520. We didn't even break under 521, which was our pivotal point. So we were looking to see if we had any breakdown of 520 to retest our demand zone around here and lead to a further bounce, or even if we just tested the bottom end of this channel, maybe look below and then recapture. But on our pullback this week, we actually did not break under 521, which was really good. That was our level that we were looking at to kind of indicate whether price action was going to be continuing bullish or bearish. So holding over 521 was extremely good, and it kept us in our buying channel that we have here building out for the last few weeks, right? We've been looking at it for 4 weeks now, so it's nice to see us still hold it up, that we're still holding it, especially after the pullback on our bear flag here. We have not broken under our 505 on QQQ, and this is kind of our failure of the weekly trend. We have not done so, which is great. As far as our daily, nothing too much to say about the daily. Similar to SPY, the only thing I do want to mention is we did not test new highs. All right, unlike unlike SPY, right, which I guess is a good thing, right? We're testing where we have this positive momentum built pushing up, right? Similar on SPY. The difference is with SPY we had a break of our previous high with little confidence, and then we chopped right underneath it. With QQQ, with this positive momentum, we did not break our previous high here. We don't even have, if I go down to the hourly, right, we don't even have that similar chop that SPY has, right, where it's tested. Let's go ahead and look at SPY real quick so you guys can see, right? So we have that break of the new high, and then we just chopped, right? This is the hourly candle, so this is multiple hours of just chop, as opposed to QQQ when it had, struggled towards that high. We did not break above that high. We did not create a newer high in our structure here, because what a healthy breakout is you're going to be testing these highs. A good breakout is a test of the highs, smaller pullback, and a flush right through those highs, right? That's what a breakout is, right? It's breaking out, it's testing our previous resistance, building a little consolidation or chop or whatever you want to call it, a pullback, and creating an area of value before rocketing and taking out those highs. So we haven't had that yet on QQQ, which is a little bit more hopeful for SPY, because if we do have that breakout on QQQ, obviously SPY is going to feel it as well. So it's important to note that despite us having that little worrisome chop near the top on SPY, we do still have hope that QQQ can lead that battle upwards. Let's see. And we're still holding the buying candle, and then let's go to our daily structure building out here. So similar with SPY, we have this. Similar to SPY, we have a buying channel building out here, much different than our previous sloping support here on push up, pull back, push up, pull back. We have buyers continuing to step up, not creating a lower low, and post this CPI gap down. And let's go to the 1 hour. That's what I wanted to mention here. Okay. Here, this is what I was trying to mention last week, was if we have a breakdown under the 520 level, a healthy retest of this area here of chop, creating some value in this range around 519, 518 right here, was a nice healthy pullback bounce. Last week we mentioned that QQQ can afford a lower high on the weekly, as we saw in our buying channel that I showed you just a moment ago on the weekly chart. Was we actually ended up, let's go to the weekly real quick so I'm not just explaining it to you without you seeing it, right? So I was saying that last week we can have a lower high on QQQ and still maintain this channel, right? So price could have still gone down to this 519 area and still maintain the bullish stance that we have on the weekly. So that's kind of what I was looking for this week, to see if we can have that retest of the lows, and look for a decent buying opportunity for the upside. But with our CPI gap down, it still held over our 521 level, which was still good. It was in there. It's obviously an area where price is consolidating, so it's holding value there. But we did not test the lower end of the range. And last week we also mentioned that we wanted to see a breakout of our 526 level and holding over 527 so we can test for new highs around 5:30, and that's essentially what happened. This box that I drew out here is our Wednesday's price action, which is, like I said, kind of like a forgiven day in a way, because similar price action happened on Tuesday, right, where we had the break, retest our 526 level, confirmations over 527, chop a little bit before breaking up. So if you just take out our CPI news day, right, it changed the structure that we had, but it didn't completely invalidate that structure either. Because if you just take out this day, this same price action is happening here where we're holding over 527 to test and break out for new highs. Um, as far as pathing goes, similar to SPY, we're at the tippy top here, so can't really give too much anticipation for upside. All we can look for is to see how what downside pressure is going to give us, right? So is this downside pressure going to give us continued positive momentums upwards, or is it going to give us lack of continuation and positive negative momentum to the downside? So as far as pathing goes for QQQ, keep it simple. We have a few things here. First and foremost, we can have. Can I draw blue? Yes, I can draw blue. Okay. So first and foremost, we can have a pullback around these previous highs here. There's also the same area a little further back in our chart here, 534 ish. A pullback around this area, and holding over 533, right around here, right where we previously had that pullback, and a break to the upside, like so break down like this. This is our healthy pullback for some bounces like this. Similar price action where we're creating a head and shoulders pattern here. Or what we could do, which is, I would say, a little bit more healthier. It sounds weird, but you'll see what I mean, is having stronger pullback here, much more stronger pullback, maybe chop around in this previous area of chop, pull back. I want us to test this 530 level again. It's just been a struggle. It's been a struggle. If I go back further, it's been a struggle. I want a test of that level and a bounce off with confidence, as opposed to where we had this struggle, and then we have this gap up, and gap up, and buyers just stepped in to solidify the significance of 530 and giving us confidence that 530 is going to be a level where buyers are stepping in. I would like to see a pullback there. Maybe we test our supports on the way down. You could trade these supports on the way down, but essentially what I'm looking for is something like this, where we're testing the 530 level before having a nice clean breakup. As opposed to the head and shoulders pattern, I think if we have some support off of this 530 level, 530, 531, and we start closing over 532 for sure, right, off of this bounce here, and we start closing over 532, we can have some crazy movements on the upside. What I would be looking for on a pullback like this is what I'm anticipating, is more of a deeper pullback here at 530, and I'm looking around 533, 533.50, 533.60, around that area, for to see how price action is resolved once we get up there, right? So do we have a little chop here, or do we have the breakout, retest of it, and then huge momentum's up? So I want to see us break below here, retest this 530 level, 531 area. That gives way more confidence in a deeper pullback without giving away the bottom of this range that we had here, and just testing the upper bounds of it and breaking above, and closures over 533.60 would definitely be a better long, as opposed to coming down here and then trying to go long and then it resists here and you fall down. I would definitely look to see if we have a deeper pullback around 530 for and a retest of our 533 level for some continued upside and possibly new highs. This is what I would be looking for. I want to see on any pullback how price is going to react on the upside. 533 is going to be my indicator for longs, um, not financial advice. And let's move on to our IWM. IWM, there is not much for me to say here. We have been chopping around here, right? So we had this several, a whole month here of chop on this lower end. Then we had a whole month of chop on this upper end. On top of that, if we're looking at our weekly here, this is something that we mentioned a little while ago on the weekly. I'm not gonna look too much at the candle. This is not a hammer candle. It is, yeah, a hammer candle should be a changing character. Um, if we're on the downside here and then this becomes green, it's not a hammer candle yet. But we have been struggling to get over the 50% of our previous push down here towards the beginning of December. So we have not, we've had multiple tests of this area for multiple weeks now, 1, 2, 3 weeks prior now, where we've had tests of this 50%. We just cannot close above it. And we're sitting at the same spot. So last week we mentioned that 224 or 225 ish was our level for breaks for calls and puts, and essentially that's what happened, right? I mentioned that we want to start looking at our resistances and our supports, just in the area as an area of significance to see where we can just get in and out really quickly. But the overall arching thing I was mentioning last week was around 225. Break above is longs, break below is shorts, and essentially that's all that we have here. So on a positive momentum up, if you wanted to take a long, could have easily taken a long towards the upper ends of these bounds, and we're just having this same choppy price action, right? So we finally broke above 224 for longs, breakdown. We finally broke below it for shorts, and there's nothing much going on. It's just a huge chop here until we can start claiming 227. Once again, once we start having some price action above 227, then we can start looking to see if price wants to make to break out of our 230 level to create new highs here, or if we start failing underneath 225 and even better under 220 for us to create a new range below. Because right now we just have a upper bound range and a lower bound range that we're chopping in. So as far as IWM, I can't say with confidence that there's any significant pathing happening here, but our levels are going to be the most significant thing here in our trades. Quickly to mention, we had our futures trading mentorship most recently. During that live, I kind of went through here for some just kind of giving the team an overview of our supports and resistances. The reason I bring this up is because right here on this arrow here is when we had that conversation, and we drew these little levels here. These are in a separate chart from my main chart, but the levels are similar to the ones that I provide you guys. And just to give you an indicator of how these supports and resistances are being played out on IWM, you can see that we have, test over supports, break towards the resistance, just a look below. The moment it filled underneath, you could have shorted to the next support. Similar, on the next day, we broke under support, shorted to the next support, so on and so forth, right? IWM is just playing within range for the longest time. So our levels are going to be our biggest indicators at this point, right? Even here when we had the CPI gap down, breakout, retest of our 223 level, and if you held along towards the highs of our next support here at 225, because every support turns to resistance when we break under that support. So similar then, we could have taken 223 to 225 long here. Not financial advice, but just kind of giving you an example of how we're just in this range bound, and all we can do is rely on our levels for IWM. Cannot stress that enough. And then let's just go through our internals here for our. Let's start with the high yield bond. So our high yield bond is our credit risk appetite in the market. You want to see positive momentum in this ticker. Um, it gives tech that boost that it needs, right? So you want to see positive momentums here. Last week we were right around here where we were just testing this 79 level. Um, I mentioned that if we had a breakdown and a support that held, or a breakdown and we held price action over 79 here and not break below, then we would not invalidate our bull trend that we have here taking place. And if we tested our 79s again, we would be testing new highs or testing the highs in SPY and QQQ. And as you've seen on Friday, that's exactly what happened. So it's just wanted to point out how important our other tickers are, or other market indicators are, because it does give you kind of an idea of where the market's going, as far as pathing wise, right? So just looking to see if we can start closing over the 679.80 level, and with strong momentum upwards, we can hope to look for new highs in our SPY and QQQ. So I want to see what we do on our open tomorrow. If we have somewhat of a breakdown and we still hold over maybe 79.50, let's call it in the middle of the range here. A breakdown, I have some support around here. Retesting the 79 to push forward upwards would be ideal. So let's see if we can hold above this 79 or 80 level. It'll give us more confidence that SPY and QQQ does want to test those new highs. And once we start breaking below our resistances, our supports rather, that's essentially when the market is starting to lose confidence in these high growth techs companies, right? Because these tech companies need it's a risky asset. Tech is one of the most risky assets, right? Because it can grow exponentially and it could also decay even, even faster. So this is kind of a good judge on our market's like risk appetite. That's essentially what people use the high yield bonds, corporate bonds for, right? Just to judge whether people feel more comfortable putting their money in more risky assets. And when they do, you'll have these positive momentums in our QQQ and our tech sector, which gives us the overall positive momentum in our SPY. And one other thing to mention on our overalls is SMH. This is our semiconductor ETF. And I think week after week I've been mentioning that we need to start closing over this 250 level before we can have any confidence that Nvidia wants to recover out of whatever rut it's in now, right? And as you see here, once we had that close over 250, that's when we have this spectacular push up off of the 130 level that we had on Nvidia. So making sure that we hold over this 250 on our SMH is going to be very important to see if Nvidia wants to hold the highs, especially going into our earnings next week. Nvidia's earnings is next week, I believe the 25th or the 26th. So it's important here that we're holding over 250. So if you're trading Nvidia, definitely want to take a look to see if we're holding over 250, and definitely do not want to see it under 245. A chopping around here, you can kind of just play the price action as the day goes by. But you do want to see us, if we start continuing to close over 250, then you can feel a little bit more bullish on our Nvidia stock. And as far as sectors go, this week we're going to have a lot of like influences in our financial sector, which is the second major sector in SPY. So it's for the last few weeks, it's been helping SPY hold up its price for quite some time now. With this, let's go to the daily here, with our daily positive momentum that we have going on here. And last week we had tech kind of stepping in for SPY, giving it that momentum as we saw on the QQQ chart. But we do have a lot of news coming out, and we have FOMC coming out on Wednesday, so it's going to be important to and our home buyers, yeah, our home builders. Sorry, home builders ETF. It's going to have some influences this week. Just to show if people are confident in buying homes, um, taking out new loans, right? The financial sectors and banks benefit from giving out loans. So one thing I wanted to notice is that we're continuing this. I would call this more of a bullish consolidation. That's why I have this channel the way it is, because we're creating higher highs, but it's kind of chopping around here. I want to start seeing us close over 52 here, because we did break out of our all-time highs, created new highs. On a retest, we had a deeper pullback here, but it did not give way over 50 level here, our 50-50 level. Um, so, we're still inherently bullish on it, even though that we had this pullback here. So I want to start seeing us close over 52 here. And with positive news, it might give us that push to, hold SPY up where it's at on any pullback. Or, even if we do have some negative news with the FOMC and we have a huge pullback on tech, SPY might still have the strength to hold itself up, especially with we also have news that's going to influence our industrials as well. So it might help our SPY from falling off a cliff, especially if we have news that rates are going to remain high, because that does influence the tech sector. Those sectors, they need that income, and they take out the loans to create growth in their business. So to have lower confidence in our rates being lowered or cut, it's going to be more influential to the tech sector than anything else. But the financial sectors will benefit from this. So it's worth noting to see if we can start seeing XLF start to build pressure while we're leading up to Wednesday. Our XLK here, XLK. Last week we were just looking at our supports here just to see how price would react at our supports. One thing I wanted to mention was we were looking at our 238 level to see if we can start closing over it this week, just to see if tech is going to be holding its confidence. This is our tech sector in SPY. So we wanted to see a breakout of our 238 level and start to retest here near this pivotal level here, holding support here to test the 241 area of resistance, our next resistance, is important here. So if we do have a little bit of a pullback, even if it pulls back a little bit to 230, 237.50, just a little bit underneath here, but breaking over and trying to test these 241.60 is important here, because we have similar action. If you look, it's kind of exactly what's been happening on QQQ, except now on this pullback we had an even greater push upwards, right? So if we can hold this positive momentum and not break underneath 238 or even 234 rather, and hold over here, even if we had a slight pullback in our sector here, a slight pullback here before breaking upwards, we can definitely feel way more confident that QQQ is going to try to break out of those highs and create a new high. So it's definitely worth noting our XLK to see if we're going to remain bullish on this going into this week. And our real estate sector. Nothing crazy to mention here. I just wanted to mention that for the last couple weeks, I could put a weekly candle here. Last week we were testing the 50% of our drop here, and we're slowly recovering. This week we didn't. Once again, we did not break over the 50 level, but on our daily chart, we do see that we are building. Buyers are stepping in on any pullback here. We're having some push upwards, So this kind of goes in tandem with our financial sector, our XLF, and it also will give SPY a little bit of a boost, especially if financials are going up. This week we have a lot of news that's going to influence the XLRE. So if we start seeing some negative momentum that starts breaking underneath our channel and going towards the 41 level here, then we could assume that SPY is going to have that deeper pullback that we were talking about. And we want to see if that deeper pullback is going to act as support for us to continue upwards, for both SPY and QQQ, but mainly obviously for SPY. We're looking to see if we do retest this channel and break underneath, if SPY is going to have the confidence to hold it up, hold support to continue for new highs. And let's see, our last thing on the sectors is our FXI. This is our China large cap stocks, right? So I mentioned last week that we failed to create a bull flag off of this pullback on the new highs. So we broke above out of this channel that we mentioned. So we're still above this channel here. And what I mentioned last week is typically China goes up and our stocks go down, right? The US goes down. So, you know, if FXI starts going up, then you can assume that SPY is going to go down. The thing with the divergence is, in that is at some point we're gonna have it follow trend, right? So it gives you an indicator. So if SPY is not continuing down as this is continuing up, and SPY starts to bottom out, or it starts to chop around, find support, while the China stocks are still continuing to grow upwards, and we're not having that strong continuation on the opposite direction, you can safely assume that there's going to be somewhat of a recovery on our US stocks. So that's essentially what happened here today, right? So we had this break out of our channel. China's up, you know, SPY was falling down towards Wednesday. Then we had that test of support. Chinese stocks started to chop around a little bit. And then SPY breaks out to new highs. And then this also breaks out to new highs. So now they're moving in confluence with each other. That's why last week I was mentioning that one thing that's significant about this is while it's diverging and they're going in opposite directions, depending on how fast that momentum is on the opposite direction will indicate whether it's just a deeper pullback or there is confidence in the trend going that direction. And typically short term, while this goes up, SPY will go down, but on the long term it will, if price starts to consolidate like the way we had here, it's more of an indicator that SPY is going to have that recovery, because we did not just break out and continue going up. We broke out and consolidated for a bit. So while everything was going up, SPY was going down, and then once we got to the tippy top, we slowed down a little bit, and then once we slowed down, SPY recovered. So short term it's going to look bad, and then long term it does have that little bit of a recovery. So now we're at that point where we have done the recovery. So it's really going to come down to you know, whether our supports are going to hold now on SPY. I just wanted to mention that with our FXI. We mentioned last week about it. And I'll just quickly cover our major mega caps here for our NVIDIA here. Mentioned last week that we were testing this to 129 level, and I wanted to see us have some confirmations, not only over 130, but I wanted us to recapture 132. So a break above the 132 level, retest around or 130s to have positive momentum upwards. But it could have easily stopped at any point. This large candle going upwards it's not anywhere near what I was expecting. but I definitely wanted to see us break above 130, test our 132 level here, and retest 130s one last time to confirm that we're in a positive momentum upwards. And that's kind of what happened here. As far as continuation upside, I would definitely want to see if we start holding over 139.50. It was a pivotal point in our range for the longest time. This was the upper bounds of our range, and this the center point of it. So recapturing the midpoint of our range is going to be very healthy. But one thing to note is, excuse me, we are going into earnings. It's on the 26th. So next week, we're going to earnings next week. So with Nvidia, what typically happens is we have this push up, push up, push up, push up, and then it, with IV just building up, our implied volatility just keeps going up. So the cost, as it goes up, cost of entry just keeps rising, and then news comes out and it just drops. Even if you entered a short, you would lose. Even if you entered, if you're in a long, you're obviously going to lose. But it doesn't matter which direction you choose, you're going to lose, because the cost of entry right before earnings typically is a loser trade. So just worth mentioning that, yes, I would trade this day by day. Look at Moen's levels. He posts it every single morning. Look at those levels for an intraday scalp. As far as holding something long term, it's essentially just gambling, especially if we're holding over especially if we haven't closed over 139. If we start closing over 139, maybe I would feel a little more confident that we might have some push towards a little bit higher in 142's area. Right before earnings, but then again, once earnings happens, we know it's unclear what direction price might choose at that point. So just worth mentioning here. So if you do want to trade it intraday, tomorrow, the day after, start closing over 139.50. I believe it's a much stronger. You feel more confident going long if we start closing over 139.50. Simple as that. And as far as Tesla, last week we were talking about breakdown. So we had this recovery here for a little bit, and I was looking to see if we can retest this 370 level, maybe even a more deeper pullback to 360. Oh, why do I feel more comfortable over 139.50? It's the center point of our range. So right now we have price. This gray purple box here is essentially a chop zone where Nvidia has been chopping up and down in this range for the longest. We had a breakdown underneath, a look below here, and once we started to recapture the range here, we want to see us starting closing over the upper ends of the range, because otherwise, what are we? Let's pull up my trying to draw my drawing tool. So otherwise, what we can just assume is that we'll have once again weeks of chop, weeks of chop, weeks of chop, right? Because we have not closed above the 50% of our range here. So if you want positive momentum, you obviously want it to start closing over the 50 range, so that way you can start looking at this area for strengths on the opposite side, right? Looking to see if our resistances start to break upwards. And the opposite is true. So you want to see if we start breaking above the 139.50 level and failing it, so then I can feel more comfortable with a short going down this thin structure, because we can break out of this thin structure very easily. And the other way around is we have this gap here. So closing over the midpoint of a range, there's a little bit of a room here to fill that little gap down. So that's why I mentioned it, and especially why I mentioned the 142 level. This is kind of where a gap was here before we jumped down. So to see how the earnings play out here, if we do break above it, it's unclear. So even if I do along over 139.50, it would just give me more confidence that buyers are going to step in out of the midpoint of our range and try to fill that gap. How do I find my ranges? I'll go through that at the end of the live quickly. But on our Tesla here, going back to Tesla, I'll get right back to you. On our Tesla, we were talking last week to see if we can have a pullback either 370 or pull back deeper towards 250, 260 area. Look for a bounce and a retest around 370 to go long. Obviously, that didn't play out right. We had a push down and it continued to push down. I know Moen was playing this week, so I'm pretty sure he took a short this week, which was a great trade. But I was looking for a more of a deeper pullback. So even if right now we're testing the 379 level, unless we have some confidence over 370 again, I'm not looking for any bullish momentum. As far as bearish momentum, uh, it still does not give me any signs for any bearish momentum. Maybe break underneath the 140 level, and you can play a range like this. Otherwise, a range like this, uh, uh, sorry, a range like this, where we break above 370, retest down here, break above 370, retest here, and then break out. This seems more of a better risk reward holding over on, especially for longs. As far as shorts, I would just play intraday. Just see how price action is moving. Like I said, Moen gives out the levels every day. So if you're looking to short, I would look through the levels day by day. As far as longs, I just want to see us close over 370 with more confidence to test the 400 level, um, and fill this smaller gap that we have here that I'm anticipating us filling hopefully soon. It's not guaranteed, but definitely want to start seeing us over 370, and then I would entertain some more longs. So for now, we just broke down under that support. So we have no confidence for longs, but again, we don't have any confidence on shorts until we start failing again at this level here. Previous support, resistance, resistance. Do we fail here again? Then you'll feel more comfortable us going down at 359.50. As far as Apple is concerned, nothing too major on Apple. We had a huge push up, which is amazing. So if you were trading in and you've gotten any levels from Moen here, it's just, obviously it was a nice trend upwards. The only thing that I am a little concerned about is we had this huge gap down, started to push up, and then earnings slapped us down. What are we doing at this point? Is it a recovery out of this recovery from post the drop, or do we retest, or do are we just retesting this range here to prove that the 456 256 level is going to be our stronger resistance and we have that further flush? Who knows? But we're just recovering out of this range. And one thing to mention is in this range here, there's a lot of thin structure. Even here, I mentioned earlier there was some thin structure, but once again we have some thin structure. And what does thin structure mean? It just means that price is just going in one direction for pretty much days on end, right? So there's no chop. Chop is important because, like I said, over and over, it's an area of value. It creates significance in the chart. It gives us confidence where price is going to have a slow down, or even if it chops above, we know where it's going to be resistance. With this thin structure here, if you're entering a long here, and it starts to break underneath, and you're just like, oh man, it's just pull back, it's going to recover, and then it just continues hard downwards because we have thin structure. The volume is seller. Let's clear it one more time, right? So we have sellers up here and we have buyers down here. In between is just price action. So price can quickly go against you or quickly go in your direction either way, especially if you're in a short in this case. So for longs, I definitely want to see us starting to get back into this range. So I'm not looking for longs until we start getting 250 again. Or even if we close over 250, our previous highs here, I think it's 247. That would feel a little bit more comfortable, but I would like to see us close back into this 250 range, develop some support around here, chop around for a few days, and then try to test new highs, especially with our earnings coming out next week. As far as shorts, I would look for shorts under 234. Once again, we just have this thin structure. So at this point, looking for rejections here, shorts does look like the better risk to reward. But we'll see what it looks like on tomorrow at open. Just wanted to mention quickly about this area of thin structure, right? Price is just moving quickly in between, so there's no stops really. No support that you can look towards for a couple dollars here. All right, and that kind of wraps it up here. I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording, and